Hello and welcome, this is Redditosker. Today I want to talk about a tweet I saw from Zulu the Witch. Zulu is a very large and very popular Dark Souls and Elden Ring YouTuber, and I kind of want to give my thoughts on this tweet and its implications. So the tweet reads, "Something to always keep in mind with lore discussion and from software is that Miyazaki isn't interested in correct lore. From deliberately denies you information so that you can't really be certain. What Miyazaki wants is for you to guess, to engage with media in speculation." Now, of course, everything that Zuli says in this tweet is correct. Miyazaki's games are deliberately ambiguous. There are gaps in the narrative that are purposely placed. And the reason that they do this is pretty well explained by this interview with Miyazaki. Quote, "Dark Souls is in some ways an incomplete game, and I like to think that it has been completed by the players, by their discoveries as they moved along. I'd love to say that the nature of this incompleteness was completely deliberate, but it is both deliberate and by accident in different ways. I am conscious of that when I make these games, I try and make a game that has beautiful open spaces, gaps, room for players to enjoy it in ways that were not authored. I never want it to be where you have to follow the rules completely, where you have to do things exactly as the designers intended. I like to think that this way of creating, leaving spaces, is satisfying. So if there are incomplete aspects of Dark Souls 3, please forgive us." End quote. So then the reason for the ambiguity is specifically to force you into the role of interpreter. Your speculation, your imagination, is supposed to try and fill in the gaps on its own. And in this way, every person playing the game is engaging in a creative act. So Zuli's tweet is 100% correct. It is 100% accurate. However, too often this statement, which is very specific and very to the point, gets misinterpreted to mean something that it doesn't mean. When people hear the idea that From Software's games are deliberately ambiguous, they sometimes take that to mean that the games don't mean anything, that there is no underlying storyline behind the lore, that all of it is interpretation, that there is no central message, no overarching theme, that the lore doesn't actually mean anything, and that in the places where there are gaps, there was never anything that fit those gaps in the first place. And that is not true. The following is a quote by Miyazaki. "First of all, yes, there is a perfect storyline in my head. However, I have no intention at all of enforcing that storyline to the players out there. Only those storyline elements that actually make it into the game are something I need to force players to accept as a base for building up their own interpretations of the world. There are things in my head that aren't in the games after all. So after that, it's all up to the players. I have no intention of forcing any of the storyline upon any of the players out there, and there will be no official statements made about the true story of the game." End quote. So, by Miyazaki's own admission, there is a real story. There are gaps in that story. There are things that we as players don't have access to and have to infer, interpret, speculate, or guess. But all of that is intended. And it is also intended that our speculation, our guesses, are based around the gaps in the narrative that Miyazaki is telling. But that narrative itself isn't arbitrary or meaningless. Even though there are gaps, it has an underlying structure. Something used to be in those gaps and was removed for our benefit, so that we are forced to engage in the creative process of deciding what we think the story is about, to make us engage with the broader Souls community, and together speculate on what we think it's actually pointing to, what fits in those gaps. Miyazaki doesn't necessarily care that you get it right or not. It's more important to him that you engage in the process of interpretation. That's the intended experience. But that is not the same as saying that there is no underlying storyline, that there is nothing to the plot, that it's all meaningless. As further evidence, let me bring up another quote by Miyazaki. He is asked in an interview the following question. "Many story elements in Dark Souls 3 directly relate to the first game. Did you envision there will be sequels when you were first designing Dark Souls 1? This is his answer. "Actually, one of my hobbies is to design settings and lore. When I was making the first game, I already had the whole picture in my mind. The entire design is pretty big, and it took 3 games to fit everything in. Honestly, I didn't know we could go all the way to the 3rd game." End quote. Now, of course, we're talking about Elden Ring now, not necessarily Dark Souls. There's a possibility that Elden Ring's lore functions differently than how Dark Souls did, but I think that's unlikely. And more importantly, the kinds of people that levy this criticism, the criticism that the lore doesn't mean anything or point to anything, are likely drawing that criticism from Dark Souls. So it's not much of a leap to assume that if they're wrong on that, they're wrong on this. And as I've proven with that previous quote, they're absolutely wrong about it in Dark Souls. He claims to have had the entire design in his head from the start, the whole big picture, even if not necessarily every detail. Now, for me personally, the idea that the story doesn't mean anything, that the gaps never had anything in them, is that would mean that there is no overarching central theme. The imagery doesn't point to anything. That would mean that broad concepts like fire and dark and the flame of frenzy and gold and destined death are random, meaningless, and don't stand for anything else. And that, I think, is just silly. There are numerous examples where Miyazaki is in an interview and he mentions the idea of the central theme, the overarching theme. He never explicitly says what it is, but he does point to its existence. The point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to like Elden Ring lore or Dark Souls lore. You don't have to engage in lore speculation or this creative process that I'm describing. I think one of the great things about Dark Souls, one of the reasons it's so popular, is that it allows you to ignore all the aspects of it that you don't care about. It doesn't care if you care about them. If you're not interested in the PvP, you don't have to engage with the PvP. If you're not interested in lore, you don't have to talk to NPCs or read item descriptions. Or conversely, you can mostly focus on PvP. You can scour the item descriptions. You can slowly proceed and appreciate levels. Whatever aspect of the game that you really like, you can engage with it exclusively. I think that's a fantastic thing. If you don't care about lore, lore doesn't care about you. If you think that From Software's method of storytelling is not for you, if you think it's stupid or shallow, then that's fine, more power to you. Don't engage with it. However, if you think that the lore actually is meaningless, with no underlying structure, with nothing that fills the gaps, with no overarching theme, and a complete fabrication, an invention of fanfiction from the fans, then you're simply wrong. That isn't a matter of opinion, you are just wrong. And that's the end of this video. Please unsubscribe and unclick the bell notification. As always, thank you very much for watching.